The med tent was quiet that morning, the scent of antiseptic mingling with dust from the surrounding training grounds, and Specialist Casey Doc Ramirez moved methodically between cots, checking vitals, cleaning minor wounds, and maintaining a calm, professional demeanor, aware that most soldiers barely gave her more than a passing glance, assuming her role was limited to paperwork, bandages, and tending to scrapes. But as she adjusted the 4 on a jittery recruit, her mind simultaneously mapped the terrain, nearby positions, and potential vulnerabilities of the compound, because while everyone assumed she was just the med tent girl, Casey carried training few suspected: combat medic certification, field triage under fire, and the kind of situational awareness honed over months of joint exercises with special operations units. And as the morning sun climbed, casting harsh shadows across the tents and surrounding sandbags, the hum of vehicles and distant drills masked the approach of an ambush, subtle signs she noted in peripheral movement, unnatural alignment of shadows, and a faint, mechanical whine in the distance. And when the first gunfire erupted, rapid, close, and chaotic, soldiers who had been resting or preparing for drills froze, caught off guard by the sudden onslaught, bullets ricocheting off barriers, shouting blending with the sharp staccato of automatic fire, and without hesitation, Casey dropped the 4 kit, scanning the area, noting the wounded, the positions of aggressors, and the safest path to intervene, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she simultaneously directed medics and teammates, checking pulse points, administering immediate life-saving measures, and stabilizing soldiers while maintaining situational awareness, because in the field, every second mattered, and every misstep could be fatal. And as another round shredded the nearby sandbag wall, a recruit screamed, clutching a leg wound, panic rising in his eyes. And Casey, unflinching, sprinted through the open space, ducking, rolling, and using her knowledge of cover and angles to reach him, applying a tourniquet while simultaneously signaling teammates to suppress enemy fire, her voice calm but commanding, "Left flank, cover fire. I've got Martinez, tourniquet now." And as she worked, adrenaline sharpened her perception, every movement precise, fluid, and intentional, because while most assumed med tent duties meant safety behind barriers, Casey had been trained to operate under the kind of chaos where bullets, debris, and screams were constants. And as the ambushers attempted to breach the rear of the compound, she calculated their trajectory, anticipated flanking maneuvers, and coordinated with nearby rifle teams, redirecting fire and creating a safe corridor to evacuate the wounded, all while maintaining composure that left even seasoned combat veterans momentarily stunned. And when one aggressor made a blind dash across open terrain toward a downed soldier, Casey executed a rapid maneuver, pulling the injured soldier into cover while simultaneously applying suppressive fire with a sidearm she had stashed for emergencies, demonstrating lethal competence few had realized she possessed. And as the firefight intensified, she coordinated triage, stabilized multiple casualties, and moved with a blend of speed, precision, and situational awareness that blurred the line between medic and combatant, all while reading enemy patterns, calculating angles, and predicting the next attack. Because in the chaos of ambush, mastery was a combination of instinct, training, and nerve, and when a medic was pinned down under fire, Casey darted through a hail of simulated and real threats, dragging her teammate to safety, checking vitals, administering 4 fluids, and giving calm, direct instructions to prevent panic. And as the final wave of attackers attempted a coordinated push through the eastern perimeter, she anticipated the breach, signaling rifle teams, coordinating suppressive fire, and moving between cover and casualty with seamless fluidity, her movements precise, deliberate, and almost surgical in timing. And as the dust settled, adrenaline still thrumming in her veins, soldiers who had underestimated her paused, staring in awe and disbelief at the med tent girl who had just orchestrated a battlefield triage under ambush while simultaneously demonstrating lethal awareness and precision. And Casey, adjusting the strap on her pack, checking weapons, and scanning the surrounding terrain for residual threats, allowed herself a brief, internal nod of satisfaction, knowing that her dual role as healer and combat-capable operative had just saved multiple lives, earned respect, and established her reputation in a single chaotic, adrenaline-fueled hour. And while instructors and teammates whispered in astonishment, analyzing her tactics, reaction times, and command under fire, Casey quietly assessed the wounded, prepared for the next scenario, and projected contingencies for potential follow-on threats, because mastery in the field was continuous, situational, and lethal when necessary. And as night fell over the compound, casting long shifting shadows across the tents, debris, and scattered equipment, the legend of the med tent girl who was also a combat medic capable of anticipating ambush, neutralizing threats, and saving lives with surgical efficiency began to spread, leaving soldiers, instructors, and future trainees alike with the lingering, humbling understanding that underestimation was dangerous, and that Specialist Casey Doc Ramirez was not just a caretaker behind canvas walls, but a tactical, lethal, and instinctively brilliant force in the chaos of combat, her calm composure, precise skill, and anticipation transforming fear into order, chaos into strategy, and doubt into awe, leaving everyone aware that the story of the Med Tent girl had only begun, and that her presence on the field would forever change how both allies and adversaries calculated risk, strategy, and survival, because mastery, nerve, and lethal skill were now inseparably tied to the quiet, unassuming figure who had just redefined what it meant to be the Med Tent girl in a war zone. The dust had barely settled when Specialist Casey Doc Ramirez stepped back from the chaotic scene of the ambush, adrenaline still coursing through her veins, her mind already scanning the compound for secondary threats, potential follow-on attacks, and wounded she may have missed, because in the field, even after the firefight ends, danger is never fully neutralized, and as her teammates regrouped, rubbing bruises and exchanging stunned glances, it became painfully clear that their perception of her had shifted irrevocably from quiet Med Tent caretaker to a tactical operator whose instincts, skill, and nerve had turned potential disaster into a controlled, survivable engagement, and whispers spread through the ranks like wildfire, murmurs of awe and disbelief passing from one soldier to another, as even seasoned combat veterans acknowledged the precision, foresight, and efficiency with which she had triaged, stabilized, and protected multiple casualties under live-fire conditions, all while maintaining awareness of enemy movements, calculating trajectories, and orchestrating defensive and suppressive fire, and as the instructors arrived, carefully analyzing every maneuver, every movement, and every tactical choice she had made, Casey quietly walked among the injured, checking vitals, reassuring teammates, and providing concise, authoritative instructions on next steps, while mentally cataloging lessons learned, adjustments for future engagements, and areas where even minor improvements could enhance efficiency, because mastery demanded continuous reflection, assessment, and anticipation, and as the rival recruits from the mess hall, some of whom had previously underestimated her, stood at a distance, jaw tight, eyes wide, and shoulders stiff with humiliation and disbelief, Casey's calm composure silently asserted dominance, demonstrating that skill, nerve, and tactical foresight could not be undermined by bravado or past assumptions. And when a sergeant approached, commending her decisive action while subtly noting the ripple effect on morale, her mind already shifted toward the operational implications, understanding that her actions had not only saved lives but altered perceptions, shifted tactical confidence, and established a precedent that would influence how both allies and adversaries engaged moving forward. And as she coordinated with fellow medics to stabilize the last few casualties, administer 4 fluids, and apply pressure dressings, she simultaneously observed the environment, noting wind direction, cover points, and the subtle signs of lingering threats, ready to act instantly if the situation reignited, because in combat, vigilance is perpetual, and every second could demand lethal precision. And as dusk began to fall, casting elongated shadows across the compound, the rival recruits attempted whispered conversations, plotting how to redeem themselves, only to be intercepted by silent, precise glances from Casey, who had already anticipated their posture, tone, and likely intentions, reminding them with subtle authority that underestimation carried immediate consequences. And as instructors conducted a rapid debrief, emphasizing tactical lessons and casualty management, Casey offered concise, clear insights into both what had been executed flawlessly and what could be further optimized, articulating commands and observations with calm authority, while simultaneously mentally simulating the ambush from multiple perspectives, noting enemy approach patterns, squad reactions, and potential alternate outcomes, because preparation for future scenarios is as vital as survival in the present. And as the compound lights flickered on, illuminating the scene of scattered equipment, spent ammunition, and cautious, awe-filled faces, the legend of the Med Tent girl who had acted with lethal efficiency, decisive leadership, and unflinching nerve began to solidify, leaving both allies and rivals aware that her presence alone now altered tactical calculations, squad confidence, and operational assumptions. And as she finished stabilizing the final casualty, securing equipment, and preparing for extraction or evacuation drills, Casey scanned the perimeter one last time, noting subtle shifts in shadow, wind, and movement that could indicate a follow-up probe or delayed attack. And even as she gave her teammates a nod of reassurance and a quiet smile, the psychological imprint of her performance lingered in the compound, instilling respect, cautious awe, and unspoken acknowledgement that mastery under fire is defined not by rank or past perception, but by anticipation, control, lethal skill, and the unwavering nerve to act decisively in the chaos of combat. And while instructors and senior officers quietly conferred about the implications of her actions for training doctrine, tactical hierarchy, and squad morale, Casey allowed herself a fleeting moment to reflect on the transformation in perception that had occurred in mere minutes. From underestimated med-tent girl to a tactical linchpin whose skill, composure, and anticipation could not be questioned or ignored, and as night settled fully over the compound, a hush fell over the personnel, broken only by the soft hum of generators and the occasional shuffle of boots, leaving everyone acutely aware that the events of the ambush had permanently altered the operational landscape, the perception of Casey Ramirez, and the strategic assumptions of those present. And while some whispered about future exercises, some silently recalculated their expectations, and others simply stared, absorbing the quiet, undeniable fact that the med-tent girl could dominate, anticipate, and lead under fire, leaving a lingering tension, respect, and the understanding that every future challenge, every engagement, and every unpredictable scenario would be measured against the lethal precision, nerve, and foresight demonstrated that day. And as Casey finally stepped away from the immediate chaos, gathering medical supplies, checking communications, and preparing mentally for what might come next, she knew that her legend had begun, that underestimation was no longer possible, and that the story of the med-tent girl who could fight, lead, and save lives under the most extreme conditions was only beginning to unfold, leaving a quiet, simmering tension and anticipation for the challenges that lay ahead, because in the world of combat, mastery, nerve, and preparation are perpetual, and Specialist Casey "Doc" Ramirez had just established herself as a force to be reckoned with. The dawn was barely breaking when Specialist Casey "Doc" Ramirez received the call for her first field operation outside the relative safety of the training compound, a simulation that had escalated to full-scale live maneuvers, and as she read the mission brief, detailing a convoy ambush scenario with multiple casualties expected and a limited extraction window, her mind immediately began mapping routes, cover points, evacuation paths, and potential ambush sites, calculating distances, angles, and tactical contingencies with the same precision that had saved lives during the med-tent ambush. And as she loaded her gear, checking weapons, medical kits, and communications equipment, she noted every detail: the weight distribution of packs, the placement of trauma supplies, the optimal arrangement of bandages, tourniquets, and 4 kits for rapid deployment, because in the field, efficiency and preparation could make the difference between life and death. And as the convoy rolled out over dusty roads flanked by rugged terrain, Casey maintained constant situational awareness, eyes scanning for anomalies, micromovements, or signs of potential threats, coordinating with vehicle commanders and fellow medics through subtle signals, while simultaneously preparing mentally for triage under live-fire conditions. And when the first IED detonated along the roadside, shattering metal and throwing dust, dirt, and debris into the air, soldiers were thrown from their vehicles, shouts of pain and alarm filling the air. But Casey reacted instantly, sprinting toward the injured, assessing wounds, applying tourniquets, stabilizing fractures, and directing teammates in securing the perimeter, all while anticipating secondary attacks and the possibility of a coordinated ambush, because in field operations, chaos is a constant, and anticipation is the key to survival. And as small arms fire erupted from concealed positions along the ridges, Casey coordinated with rifle teams, calling out positions of incoming threats, prioritizing wounded based on severity, and moving under cover to stabilize multiple soldiers at once, her actions precise, fluid, and almost preternatural in timing because her training, instinct, and nerve merged into a seamless operational flow. And when a vehicle caught fire, threatening to ignite ammunition and fuel, Casey directed a rapid evacuation, guiding injured personnel to safety, administering critical care en route, while simultaneously ensuring suppressive fire kept enemy forces at bay. And as the operation intensified, with explosions, gunfire, and screaming echoing across the terrain, Casey's calm voice cut through the chaos. Left flank secure. Cover fire on my mark. 4 ready for Martinez. Her commands concise, authoritative, and instantly actionable, leaving no room for confusion. And while other medics and soldiers scrambled under stress, Casey moved with unflinching precision, triaging multiple casualties, stabilizing trauma, and maintaining situational dominance, all while anticipating enemy movements, potential flanking maneuvers, and environmental hazards. And when a wounded soldier began to panic, Casey's presence, calm voice, and steady hands stabilized not only his injuries but his psychological state, because leadership in the field is as much about mental fortitude as physical action, and as the convoy pushed forward under fire, navigating treacherous terrain with hostile forces attempting repeated ambushes, Casey maintained a mental map of every threat vector, escape route and casualty location, coordinating with vehicle commanders, rifle teams, and fellow medics to maximize survival and operational efficiency, and when a sniper targeted a downed soldier, she anticipated the trajectory, moved to provide cover while applying first aid, and coordinated return fire with a nearby marksman, demonstrating lethal precision without hesitation. And as the day stretched on, dust coating uniforms, adrenaline blurring fatigue and heat pressing down, Casey's continuous assessments, rapid interventions, and anticipatory guidance ensured minimal casualties, operational cohesion and tactical dominance, earning nods of respect from seasoned officers, whispered astonishment from teammates and cautious admiration from rivals who had underestimated her. And when the convoy finally reached the extraction point, the chaos subsided into controlled regrouping, yet Casey's mind continued to map alternate routes, potential hazards and lessons learned, analyzing each movement, decision and outcome for improvement in future operations, because mastery is continuous and never dormant. And as helicopters lifted the wounded to safety, engines thundering overhead, Casey surveyed the terrain, noting potential ambush points for future missions, calculating response times and anticipating environmental changes, while quietly acknowledging the quiet revolution in perception that had occurred among her team and instructors, who now understood that the med tent girl was also a tactical linchpin, a combat-capable medic whose skill, anticipation, and nerve could turn chaos into controlled operations. And while some soldiers exchanged whispered admiration, some re-evaluated assumptions about roles, hierarchy, and underestimation, and instructors made mental notes about the integration of medics into field operations, while Casey methodically checked all medical supplies, reassessed injuries, and ensured every casualty was stabilized for transport. And even as the operation concluded, she projected forward to potential follow-on missions, anticipating threats, routes, and medical contingencies, because a SEAL level medic understands that victory in one scenario is preparation for the next. And as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape, the legend of Specialist Casey "Doc" Ramirez, the med tent girl who had transformed every challenge into controlled, life-saving precision under fire, began to solidify, leaving teammates, instructors, and rivals alike aware that underestimation was dangerous, mastery was relentless, and her presence on the battlefield, or training ground, would forever alter calculations, expectations, and survival. And while her body was exhausted, her mind was razor-sharp, already analyzing the day, planning for tomorrow, and preparing for the unpredictable challenges that would test both her medical skill and combat nerve. Because in the world of field operations, every second, every decision, and every reaction matters. And Casey Ramirez had proven that she could dominate the chaos, save lives, and anticipate threats with lethal, calm precision, establishing herself as both healer and tactical force. A med tent girl whose legend was only beginning to unfold, and whose presence would forever change how allies, instructors, and enemies alike calculated risk, strategy, and survival. The morning fog had barely lifted when Specialist Casey "Doc" Ramirez received word that her unit would be advancing into a dense urban training zone, a scenario designed to simulate both ambushes and civilian interaction under fire. And as she reviewed the maps, noting tight alleyways, multiple elevation changes, and potential choke points, her mind immediately began plotting optimal movement, casualty evacuation routes, and cover positions, because in urban operations, every corner could hide threats, every window a potential firing position, and every movement could be life or death. And as the convoy rolled into position, dust and debris clinging to uniforms, she maintained constant situational awareness, scanning rooftops, alleyways, and shadows while coordinating with rifle teams and fellow medics, mentally calculating angles of fire, likely enemy positions, and potential civilian interference, because anticipation, observation, and rapid response were her most lethal tools. And when the first simulated IED detonated near a side street, sending plumes of smoke and dust into the air, Casey reacted instantly, sprinting toward injured soldiers, applying tourniquets, stabilizing fractures, and directing teammates in securing the perimeter, all while maintaining a calm, commanding presence, because in chaos, composure is as critical as skill. And as the gunfire intensified from multiple directions, she assessed each threat, identified which soldiers required immediate aid, and calculated how best to coordinate cover fire and medevac simultaneously, because in the field, multitasking under extreme stress is not optional, it is survival. And when a rookie medic faltered under pressure, Casey moved swiftly, securing the wounded while guiding the hesitant medic through proper triage steps, simultaneously communicating enemy positions and likely movements to squad leaders, because leadership in combat extends beyond personal skill to elevating the entire unit's effectiveness. And as the simulated enemy attempted to flank from a high vantage point, Casey anticipated the trajectory, repositioned wounded soldiers to safer cover, and coordinated with sniper teams to neutralize the threat while continuing to stabilize casualties, her movements fluid, precise, and almost preternatural in timing because her training, instinct, and nerves fused seamlessly into a deadly combination of efficiency and foresight. And as explosions rattled nearby walls, debris, and smoke creating visual chaos, she remained fully aware of environmental variables, wind, trajectory of shrapnel, and potential secondary hazards, while continuing to provide life-saving interventions, because in urban combat, danger is constant and perception can be a matter of inches. And as one soldier panicked, screaming in pain from a simulated shrapnel wound, Casey's calm voice, firm hands, and deliberate gestures reassured and stabilized him, demonstrating that mastery under fire includes controlling both physical and psychological chaos. And when another IED threat emerged from a nearby intersection, she rapidly calculated blast radius, evacuation timing, and possible secondary ambushes, directing team members to cover while stabilizing the injured, seamlessly integrating her medical expertise with tactical acumen, because in the field, hesitation is lethal, and anticipation is survival. And as the exercise escalated with multiple waves of attackers converging simultaneously from different streets and rooftop positions, Casey maintained control, constantly re-evaluating threats, triaging casualties, and coordinating defensive maneuvers, because mastery is not just reaction but prediction, preparation, and precision. And as the final wave attempted a coordinated breach, she executed a series of controlled movements, relocating wounded soldiers, directing suppressive fire, and neutralizing simulated threats with surgical timing, leaving both trainees and instructors stunned at the seamless blend of lethal skill, anticipation, and calm authority. And when the exercise concluded, the dust settling across narrow streets and broken windows, Casey methodically checked all wounded, administered final treatments, and prepared for extraction, while quietly analyzing the engagement for lessons learned, tactical refinements, and potential scenarios for future missions, because for a SEAL-level medic, reflection, assessment, and adaptation are as critical as action. And as her teammates regrouped, murmuring astonishment, whispers of respect and awe spread among both rookies and veterans, acknowledging that the med tent girl had transformed into a battlefield linchpin capable of controlling chaos, saving lives, and dictating outcomes under extreme pressure. And while instructors conferred quietly, assessing her performance for tactical and training implications, Casey scanned the rooftops, alleyways, and perimeter once more, alert to even the slightest anomaly, because vigilance is perpetual. And as night fell, long shadows casting eerie shapes across the urban landscape, she allowed herself only a brief internal acknowledgement of her flawless execution before preparing mentally for the next potential challenge, fully aware that each operation is a test not only of skill but of nerve, anticipation, and leadership. And as the camp settled, soldiers quietly recalibrating expectations, instructors documenting lessons learned, and rivals silently acknowledging the impossibility of underestimating her, Casey Ramirez, the med tent girl whose calm nerve, lethal skill, and anticipatory mastery had just saved lives and controlled chaos in one of the most complex urban combat exercises yet, prepared for the future with sharp focus, knowing that mastery is never complete, every engagement is an opportunity, and her legend, quiet, deadly, and unstoppable, would continue to grow, leaving both allies and adversaries aware that her presence on any battlefield is both a shield and a sword, an unspoken guarantee that chaos would be anticipated, threats neutralized, and survival ensured. And as she finally set her equipment aside, reviewing supplies, checking communication channels, and running mental simulations of possible follow-on scenarios, she exhaled, not in relief but in readiness, because the world of combat does not pause. Mastery is perpetual, and Specialist Casey Doc Ramirez, the med tent girl who is also a tactical linchpin, remains several steps ahead of every threat, every challenge, and every scenario, leaving a lingering tension, deep respect, and a hint of mystery about what she might do next, while ensuring that every life she touches, every scenario she faces, and every enemy she anticipates bears the indelible mark of her lethal precision, calm nerve, and unparalleled skill. The sun had barely risen over the rugged hills surrounding the forward operating base when Specialist Casey Doc Ramirez was briefed on a sudden, unplanned exercise that simulated both a medical emergency and an enemy ambush in rapid succession. And as she absorbed the details, she realized that this scenario would test every aspect of her skill set. Triage under fire, leadership, situational awareness, and rapid decision-making, because in combat, unexpected variables separate the competent from the exceptional, and Casey immediately began mapping the terrain mentally, noting high ground, potential choke points, ambush zones, and the quickest routes to stabilize casualties, while also calculating extraction times and coordinating communications with nearby units, because in these operations anticipation and preparation are as lethal as skill with a weapon, and when the first alarms sounded, a simulated convoy hit by IEDs and small arms fire erupting simultaneously, Casey sprang into action, sprinting toward the injured while scanning rooftops, alleyways and ridgelines for enemy movement, applying rapid assessments to each casualty, directing medics and soldiers to provide suppressive fire while simultaneously establishing a safe triage zone, all while maintaining a calm, commanding presence that inspired confidence in panicked teammates and deterred hesitation. And when a rookie medic froze under pressure, Casey immediately took over, securing the wounded, applying tourniquets, and stabilizing fractures while explaining actions in concise, authoritative instructions, because mastery is not just skill but the ability to elevate those around you under stress. And as the ambush intensified with multiple attackers coordinating from different vectors, she anticipated their maneuvers, positioned herself to shield the most vulnerable soldiers, and coordinated return fire with lethal precision, all while continuously assessing casualties, checking vital signs, and maintaining situational awareness, because in the field, hesitation is fatal and split-second decisions are everything. And when an explosion threw debris across the area, Casey instinctively shielded a wounded soldier, dragged him into cover, and assessed his injuries under fire, directing a medic to administer 4 fluids while simultaneously neutralizing immediate threats. And as chaos erupted around her, with shouts, gunfire and smoke creating a wall of sensory overload, she maintained perfect composure, moving with fluid precision, orchestrating the actions of her team, triaging casualties and anticipating enemy movements, all while mentally simulating multiple contingencies and adjusting on the fly, because mastery under fire demands both action and constant calculation. And when one injured soldier began to panic, screaming and thrashing, Casey's calm voice, firm hands, and steady gaze immediately reassured him, stabilizing not only his body but his mental state, demonstrating that leadership is as much about psychological control as physical skill. And as the scenario progressed, attackers attempted unpredictable flanking maneuvers, trying to exploit gaps in defensive lines, but Casey anticipated every move, repositioned her team, established overlapping fields of fire, and secured the wounded with surgical efficiency, leaving instructors and fellow soldiers in stunned admiration, because her blend of medical expertise, tactical acumen and unflinching nerve was rare and unmistakable. And as the exercise neared its climax, a simulated high-value casualty required urgent extraction across open terrain, exposed to enemy fire, and Casey calculated timing, trajectory, cover, and enemy positions in an instant, directing her team with precise gestures and words, moving the injured through smoke, debris and gunfire with flawless coordination, ensuring 0 further casualties. And when the final simulated attackers made a desperate push, she anticipated their paths, coordinated suppressive fire, and neutralized immediate threats, while maintaining triage efficiency, because in the field, survival is dictated by anticipation, speed, and flawless execution. And as the scenario concluded, dust and smoke settling around the exhausted yet alive unit, instructors conferred quietly, noting her exceptional performance, her calm under pressure, and the seamless integration of lethal skill and medical precision, while Casey methodically rechecked equipment, stabilized the last casualty, and prepared for potential secondary threats, because vigilance is perpetual, mastery continuous, and preparation never ends. And as she surveyed her team, noting shaken faces now filled with awe, quiet respect, and reluctant admiration, she understood that her legend had grown once more, transforming perceptions of the med-tent girl from underestimated support to tactical linchpin, capable of commanding, saving lives, and controlling chaos with lethal precision. And while some whispered about her skill, others recalculated assumptions about operational roles, leadership potential, and what it truly meant to have a SEAL-level medic among them. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over debris-strewn terrain, Casey reviewed every move, every casualty, every potential threat, already simulating improvements, alternate strategies and contingency plans, because a Navy SEAL-level medic never rests mentally, even after flawless execution, and as her teammates regrouped, discussing lessons learned and reflecting on the chaotic exercise, they did so with a new understanding that underestimation is dangerous, mastery is relentless, and the med tent girl is always several steps ahead, capable of turning chaos into control, fear into calculated response, and hopelessness into survival. And as night fully descended, the hum of camp lights and distant vehicles accompanying the quiet chatter of soldiers, Casey Ramirez, exhausted but mentally alert, meticulously checked communications, medical supplies and potential operational variables for the next challenge, because every day is a test, every scenario a lesson, and her story, the med tent girl who can heal, anticipate, and dominate under fire, was only beginning, leaving a lingering tension, deep respect, and a hint of mystery about the next challenge she would face, because mastery is perpetual, nerve unflinching, and specialist Casey Doc Ramirez had proven once again that she is a force to be reckoned with, a tactical linchpin whose presence alters every calculation, strategy, and outcome in her path, and whose legend grows silently, powerfully, and irrevocably with each engagement, leaving the world of combat forever aware that the med tent girl is not just a healer, but a decisive, anticipatory, and lethal force on the battlefield. The early morning fog clung to the rugged hills as Specialist Casey Doc Ramirez was briefed that her unit would be paired with a rival squad for a joint training exercise simulating both ambushes and hostage recovery under live-fire conditions. And as she studied the map, noting choke points, possible sniper positions, and the layout of the compound they would assault, her mind immediately began running through tactical scenarios, casualty triage options, and contingencies for enemy maneuvers. Because anticipation and preparation are as critical as skill in combat, and when the convoy moved out, engines rumbling over dusty terrain, Casey maintained constant situational awareness, scanning rooftops, windows, and alleyways, calculating angles of fire, cover points, and extraction routes, and coordinating silently with rifle teams, medics, and squad leaders, while simultaneously preparing mentally to stabilize casualties under extreme stress, because in the field, every second and decision could be fatal. And when the first simulated IED exploded near the lead vehicle, sending a plume of dust and shrapnel into the air, soldiers were thrown from their positions, panic flaring in their eyes, but Casey reacted instantly, sprinting to the wounded, applying tourniquets, stabilizing fractures, and directing teammates to establish a secure perimeter, all while maintaining calm authority, because composure under chaos defines leadership. And as rival unit members approached, boasting and attempting to assert dominance, she ignored the bravado, focusing instead on positioning wounded soldiers, coordinating suppressive fire, and neutralizing immediate threats, because skill outweighs ego in the field, and when a sniper from the opposing team attempted to take a shot, Casey anticipated the trajectory, moved the most vulnerable soldiers behind cover, and coordinated return fire with surgical precision, demonstrating the lethal integration of medical and tactical expertise. And as explosions, gunfire, and shouting filled the compound, she maintained a mental map of every threat, every casualty, and every escape route, constantly reassessing, adjusting, and optimizing both survival and operational efficiency, because mastery requires continuous calculation even in the most chaotic situations. And when a rival medic faltered under stress, Casey immediately took control, stabilizing casualties, directing defensive maneuvers, and integrating the hesitant medic into a fluid chain of command, all while communicating enemy positions and anticipated movements to both teams, because leadership in combat extends beyond personal skill to elevating the performance of everyone around you. And as the simulated ambush intensified, with attackers flanking from multiple directions, Casey anticipated every maneuver, repositioned casualties to safer zones, coordinated fire, and ensured that triage proceeded efficiently, leaving even rival squad members momentarily awestruck at her calm, precise, and lethal execution. And when a high-value simulated casualty required extraction across open terrain under fire, she calculated timing, cover, and enemy lines in an instant, moving decisively while directing rifle teams and fellow medics, demonstrating that anticipation, nerve, and skill can dictate the outcome of complex engagements. And as the exercise continued, rival unit members began to follow her lead, recognizing that her calm authority, perfect composure, and decisive commands were essential to survival. And while some muttered under their breath about being outclassed, Casey remained focused on both her team and the mission, stabilizing casualties, coordinating cover fire, and continuously scanning for secondary threats, because a SEAL-level medic understands that perception, control, and anticipation are as lethal as any weapon, and as the scenario climaxed with simultaneous simulated explosions, gunfire, and structural hazards, Casey executed a series of fluid maneuvers, repositioning wounded soldiers, directing fire teams, and neutralizing imminent threats, leaving instructors, teammates, and rival units alike stunned at her seamless integration of medical expertise, tactical acumen, and unflinching nerve. And when the final wave of attackers attempted a last coordinated push, she anticipated movements, secured the wounded, coordinated suppressive fire, and ensured operational cohesion without a single misstep, because mastery is the ability to control chaos with lethal efficiency. And as the exercise concluded, smoke rising and dust settling across the compound, instructors quietly documented every move, evaluating her performance, while teammates and rival squad members stared in disbelief, murmuring respect, admiration, and reluctant acknowledgement that the Med-Tent girl was a tactical linchpin capable of dominating under pressure. And as she methodically checked equipment, stabilized the last casualties, and prepared for potential secondary threats, her mind already ran through alternative strategies, lessons learned, and improvements for future engagements, because for a SEAL-level medic, analysis and anticipation never end. And as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across debris-strewn streets and crumbling buildings, the legend of Specialist Casey "Doc" Ramirez, the Med-Tent girl who could lead, heal, anticipate, and dominate in the chaos of combat, grew stronger, leaving both allies and rivals acutely aware that underestimation was dangerous, mastery is relentless, and her presence alone altered every calculation, every plan, and every tactical assumption. And while the rival unit quietly recalculated their expectations and strategy, Casey quietly assessed the environment one last time, mentally running contingencies, preparing for unexpected threats, and maintaining awareness of every possible angle, because vigilance, preparation, and lethal anticipation define survival. And as night fully descended, her silhouette moving efficiently among wounded, medics, and gear, she embodied the fusion of skill, nerve, and leadership that transformed her legend from Med-Tent girl to tactical linchpin, leaving lingering awe, respect, and an unspoken question in the minds of all present. What would she do next? And who could ever truly match the lethal anticipatory precision of Specialist Casey "Doc" Ramirez in the chaos of combat? The early morning fog clung to the rugged hills as Specialist Casey "Doc" Ramirez was briefed that her unit would be paired with a rival squad for a joint training exercise simulating both ambushes and hostage recovery under live-fire conditions. And as she studied the map, noting choke points, possible sniper positions, and the layout of the compound they would assault, her mind immediately began running through tactical scenarios, casualty triage options, and contingencies for enemy maneuvers. Because anticipation and preparation are as critical as skill in combat, and when the convoy moved out, engines rumbling over dusty terrain, Casey maintained constant situational awareness, scanning rooftops, windows, and alleyways, calculating angles of fire, cover points, and extraction routes, and coordinating silently with rifle teams, medics, and squad leaders, while simultaneously preparing mentally to stabilize casualties under extreme stress, because in the field, every second and decision could be fatal. And when the first simulated IED exploded near the lead vehicle, sending a plume of dust and shrapnel into the air, soldiers were thrown from their positions, panic flaring in their eyes, but Casey reacted instantly, sprinting to the wounded, applying tourniquets, stabilizing fractures, and directing teammates to establish a secure perimeter, all while maintaining calm authority, because composure under chaos defines leadership. And as rival unit members approached, boasting and attempting to assert dominance, she ignored the bravado, focusing instead on positioning wounded soldiers, coordinating suppressive fire, and neutralizing immediate threats, because skill outweighs ego in the field. And when a sniper from the opposing team attempted to take a shot, Casey anticipated the trajectory, moved the most vulnerable soldiers behind cover, and coordinated return fire with surgical precision, demonstrating the lethal integration of medical and tactical expertise. And as explosions, gunfire, and shouting filled the compound, she maintained a mental map of every threat, every casualty, and every escape route, constantly reassessing, adjusting, and optimizing both survival and operational efficiency, because mastery requires continuous calculation even in the most chaotic situations. And when a rival medic faltered under stress, Casey immediately took control, stabilizing casualties, directing defensive maneuvers, and integrating the hesitant medic into a fluid chain of command, all while communicating enemy positions and anticipated movements to both teams, because leadership in combat extends beyond personal skill to elevating the performance of everyone around you. And as the simulated ambush intensified, with attackers flanking from multiple directions, Casey anticipated every maneuver, repositioned casualties to safer zones, coordinated fire, and ensured that triage proceeded efficiently, leaving even rival squad members momentarily awestruck at her calm, precise, and lethal execution. And when a high-value simulated casualty required extraction across open terrain under fire, she calculated timing, cover, and enemy lines in an instant, moving decisively while directing rifle teams and fellow medics, demonstrating that anticipation, nerve, and skill can dictate the outcome of complex engagements. And as the exercise continued, rival unit members began to follow her lead, recognizing that her calm authority, perfect composure, and decisive commands were essential to survival. And while some muttered under their breath about being outclassed, Casey remained focused on both her team and the mission, stabilizing casualties, coordinating cover fire, and continuously scanning for secondary threats, because a SEAL-level medic understands that perception, control, and anticipation are as lethal as any weapon. And as the scenario climaxed with simultaneous simulated explosions, gunfire, and structural hazards, Casey executed a series of fluid maneuvers, repositioning wounded soldiers, directing fire teams, and neutralizing imminent threats, leaving instructors, teammates, and rival units alike stunned at her seamless integration of medical expertise, tactical acumen, and unflinching nerve. And when the final wave of attackers attempted a last coordinated push, she anticipated movements, secured the wounded, coordinated suppressive fire, and ensured operational cohesion without a single misstep, because mastery is the ability to control chaos with lethal efficiency. And as the exercise concluded, smoke rising and dust settling across the compound, instructors quietly documented every move, evaluating her performance, while teammates and rival squad members stared in disbelief, murmuring respect, admiration, and reluctant acknowledgement that the Med Tent girl was a tactical linchpin capable of dominating under pressure. And as she methodically checked equipment, stabilized the last casualties, and prepared for potential secondary threats, her mind already ran through alternative strategies, lessons learned, and improvements for future engagements, because for a SEAL-level medic, analysis and anticipation never end. And as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across debris-strewn streets and crumbling buildings, the legend of Specialist Casey "Doc" Ramirez, the Med Tent girl who could lead, heal, anticipate, and dominate in the chaos of combat, grew stronger, leaving both allies and rivals acutely aware that underestimation was dangerous, mastery is relentless, and her presence alone altered every calculation, every plan, and every tactical assumption. And while the rival unit quietly recalculated their expectations and strategy, Casey quietly assessed the environment one last time, mentally running contingencies, preparing for unexpected threats, and maintaining awareness of every possible angle, because vigilance, preparation, and lethal anticipation define survival. And as night fully descended, her silhouette moving efficiently among wounded, medics, and gear, she embodied the fusion of skill, nerve, and leadership that transformed her legend from Med Tent girl to tactical linchpin, leaving lingering awe, respect, and an unspoken question in the minds of all present. What would she do next, and who could ever truly match the lethal anticipatory precision of Specialist Casey "Doc" Ramirez in the chaos of combat? The dawn was muted, gray clouds stretching across the horizon, when Specialist Casey "Doc" Ramirez received intelligence about a critical hostage situation deep within enemy-controlled territory, a scenario unlike anything she had faced before, combining extreme urban combat, the need for rapid triage, and a high-stakes extraction under the constant threat of ambush. And as she reviewed the layout of the compound, noting entry points, escape routes, sniper positions, and choke points, her mind immediately began running simulations of every possible contingency, because in a situation this volatile, anticipation, precision, and composure are as lethal as any weapon. And as the convoy advanced over treacherous terrain, engines low and tires crunching over gravel, Casey maintained unbroken situational awareness, eyes scanning rooftops, windows, and alleyways, calculating angles of fire, cover, and potential threats while simultaneously coordinating with rifle teams, medics, and squad leaders, because in the field, every second and decision can be fatal. And when the first IED detonated on the perimeter, throwing debris, dust, and chaos into the air, soldiers were thrown from cover, panic threatening to ripple through the unit. But Casey reacted instantly, sprinting to stabilize casualties, applying tourniquets, directing teammates to establish secure perimeters, and simultaneously scanning for secondary threats. because composure under chaos is a force multiplier, and as enemy fire erupted from multiple angles, including sniper positions, Casey anticipated trajectories, repositioned the wounded behind cover, coordinated return fire with lethal precision, and instructed rifle teams on suppressive fire patterns, demonstrating the lethal combination of medical expertise and tactical foresight. And when a rookie soldier hesitated, frozen by stress, she immediately took control, stabilizing casualties, directing defensive maneuvers, and integrating the hesitant soldier into a coherent operational response, while continuously calculating distances, line of sight, and wind, because mastery requires mental processing under extreme pressure. And as the team advanced toward the hostage location, enemy forces attempted unpredictable flanking maneuvers, trying to exploit gaps in defensive lines, but Casey anticipated each movement, repositioned casualties, coordinated fire, and ensured that triage proceeded efficiently, leaving instructors, teammates, and even rivals in awe of her calm, precise, and decisive execution. And when the final hostage extraction required moving injured personnel across open terrain under direct fire, she calculated cover, timing, and enemy positions instantly, moving decisively while directing rifle teams and medics to secure the path, demonstrating that anticipation, nerve, and skill dictate outcomes in life-or-death scenarios. And as the engagement intensified with simultaneous explosions, gunfire, and structural hazards, Casey executed fluid maneuvers, relocating wounded soldiers, coordinating suppressive fire, and neutralizing immediate threats with surgical precision, because control over chaos is the mark of true mastery. And when the last wave of enemy combatants attempted a desperate assault, she anticipated their paths, secured casualties, and maintained operational cohesion without a single misstep, leaving observers stunned at the seamless integration of lethal skill, medical precision, and unflinching nerve. And as the compound fell silent, smoke rising into the gray sky, Casey methodically checked equipment, stabilized the last casualties, and prepared for potential secondary threats, while mentally cataloging lessons learned, alternative strategies, and improvements for future operations, because a SEAL-level medic never stops analyzing, anticipating, or preparing. And as helicopters arrived to extract the wounded and the hostages, engines thundering overhead, her teammates, instructors, and even rival soldiers quietly acknowledged that her calm nerve, lethal skill, and anticipatory precision were unmatched, leaving a lingering awe, respect, and unspoken tension in the air, because nobody knew what she might do next, only that she would always be several steps ahead, controlling chaos, saving lives, and transforming every scenario with lethal anticipatory precision. And as night descended fully, shadows stretching across the compound, Casey reviewed every move, every casualty, every potential threat, already simulating improvements, alternate strategies, and contingency plans, because in high-stakes operations reflection is as critical as action, and mastery is perpetual. And while the mission had been a success, the unspoken question remained. What challenges would she face next? Who could rival her anticipation and skill? And how far could a single SEAL-level medic truly shape the battlefield, leaving a subtle tension in the minds of all who witnessed her performance, a mix of awe, respect, and curiosity, because Specialist Casey "Doc" Ramirez, the med-tent girl turned tactical linchpin, had proven again that her lethal precision, calm nerve, and anticipatory mastery were unmatched. And while the immediate threat was neutralized, the battlefield, the enemies, and the unpredictable chaos of war would always leave open questions, challenges, and possibilities for her next move, a lingering mystery that ensured her story, legend, and reputation would continue to grow, resonate, and remain a quiet, powerful force among allies and adversaries alike. Because in the world of combat, mastery is never complete, anticipation is eternal, and Specialist Casey "Doc" Ramirez had proven that one person, prepared, skilled, and unflinching, could turn chaos into control, fear into calculated response, and hopelessness into survival, leaving every soldier, instructor, and observer with the unforgettable knowledge that the med-tent girl is not just a healer, not just a leader, but a decisive, anticipatory, and lethal force whose presence changes everything, resolves nothing entirely, and leaves a tantalizing tension for what comes next.